All right. Hello, everybody. Chapter 15. All right. Let's talk. So there's a lot of difficult stuff that we'll cover in this chapter. Okay. Especially if you don't really understand physics all that well. Um, but let's just go over them slowly. And as usual, ask questions if you have questions. Okay. Yes, I know it's kind of weird to ask you guys to remember your physics stuff from scientific concepts and stuff, but it's actually really important. Um, okay, and as I learn more and more about physiology and stuff, physics becomes more and more role. Okay, all right, so so this chapter is all about blood pressure and blood flow. Okay, remember from last chapter, flow is basically um, going from high pressure to low pressure. That's basically what flow is. Okay, so flow will always take a fluid from high pressure to low pressure. Okay. Okay. So now, you think the heart is something that pumps blood. Okay. Now, I want you to think about this a little bit differently. I want you to think from pressure. The heart is a device that generates pressure. Okay. And as the device generates pressure, okay, here you have high pressure, and as it moves through the system, because of friction, the pressure slows down, like lessens over time. Okay, and then this pressure is especially slow in the capillary. Okay, because of the surface area of the capillaries. So there's still pressure, but the pressure is really low in the capillaries, and that pressure allows the flow to slow down dramatically. And therefore, you have gas exchange and nutrient exchange. And then the pressure picks up slightly as you go from the capillaries to the veins. So they go in smaller, like tube. They go in the tubes are bigger, but the surface volume is smaller. So they go into fewer and fewer tubes. So the volume is smaller. So that increases pressure a little bit, and that pushes the blood back to the heart. Okay. Also, in the veins are going to be valves that control backflow. Okay. Okay. So one of the things I want you guys to think about as we talk through this is the arteries and the veins being very different. The arteries are going to be a pressure reservoir. They're going to withstand pressure, and they're going to adjust to pressure. The veins are going to be a volume reservoir. Most of your blood flow is actually in your veins. Okay. All right. Okay. So again, this stuff about veins you should already know. The most important thing is that these capillary or these blood vessels are capable of two things: vasoconstriction and vasodilation. Okay. Okay. So this stuff you should already know from. Okay. So gas exchange. Okay. This stuff you should already know from anatomy. Okay. So the way that capillary beds work. So this is a capillary bed. Okay. Again, this should be a slide that you go over anatomy, but we'll go over it. There's actually um, two ways to get things through a capillary bed. Okay. If I want blood flow through the capillary bed, okay, then I release all the valves. So there's valves on one side, on the arterial side. Okay. If I shut off all the valves on the arterial side, the only throughput channel is this one, the meta-arterial. So it goes through the meta-arterial directly to the venule. Okay, and therefore there is very little gas exchange and nutrient exchange. Okay, but if I wanted blood flow, I can just open up all these little valves here, and now the blood goes through the better arterial, but less, and the other ones go through all these side channels. And the side channels are all the true capillaries, and they provide the blood, the oxygen and the nutrients, and they take away the wastes. Okay. 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 So venules and veins. Okay. So veins act as a volume reservoir. So if you have more fluid, it just ends up in your veins. Okay. And they can adjust to the amount of fluid you have, because the amount of fluid you have in your blood varies slightly day to day and stuff like that. So it varies depending on how much water you drink. Okay. So veins have one-way valves to prevent backflow. Okay. They're more numerous than arteries, and they're closer to the surface. Okay. So your veins are more shallow. That's why it's easier to find a vein to inject things into than an artery. Okay, and there's also less nerves around veins, so that the injections hurt less. That's why the injections in the veins don't hurt nearly as much as arterial injections. Okay, or arterial blood draws. Okay. All right. So I said arteries are under high pressure. That's why they're thicker and stronger. They have to withstand the pressure. If pressure comes, they can withstand the pressure. Veins cannot. Veins are under low pressure, so they're kind of floppy and flimsy. And what they do is they have valves, and these valves, okay, actually prevent backflow. Okay, when you have damage to those valves is when you do get backflow, and then the veins get all distorted and out of whack, and that's where you get spider veins and stuff. Okay. Okay. So the other thing veins do is, because they're so thin, the muscles can actually work on the veins. Okay. So when you flex your muscles, when you contract your muscles, what they do when they squeeze is they also conveniently squeeze the veins, and that helps drive the blood back to your heart. Okay. If you sit for a long period of time, you can kind of feel the blood pooling in your legs, and this is especially true if you're A, obese, or B, elderly. You can feel that when you sit down, like all the blood is in your legs, and the treatment for that is to simply get up and walk around every once in a while, and like that will cause the circulation to go. Okay. All right. Definitely an important concept, angiogenesis. Okay. Angiogenesis creates new blood vessels. Okay. This is necessary for normal development. As you get bigger, obviously you need more blood vessels. Okay. You need wound healing and uterine light growth lining. It has a skeletal muscle blood flow. So if I'm working out all the time, I would build a new skeletal muscle, and the skeletal muscle I have more oxygen demand. More of oxygen demand, more blood is needed. So I start secreting cytokines, in particular VEGF and FGF, okay, that stimulate blood vessel formation. Okay. All right. These are countered by angiostatin and endostatin. You might have heard of angiostatins before. Angiostatins are a tumor prevention drug. Okay. One of the things and you'll learn this in pathophys, when you have a tumor, right? That tumor needs to grow. And the only way tumors grow is they start acting like your regular cells and attracting blood flow. So they generate angiogenesis, blood flow to the tumor. When that happens, the tumor gets nutrients and grow very quickly. So one of the best things to do to stop tumor growth, okay, is to take angiostatin or endostatin, and that prevents angiogenesis. No angiogenesis, no tumor growth. Your tumors can only get so big without blood. Okay. All right. Blood pressure is the highest in the arteries and in the veins. So the further away from the heart, okay, the less pressure you have. Okay. So pulse pressure is a measure of strength, pressure wave produced by ventricular contraction. So pulse pressure is systemic pressure by the diastolic pressure. Okay, so systolic pressure is when the heart contracts. Diastolic pressure is when the heart relaxes. The difference between the two is the pressure of the pulse, how hard your heart is beating, and that is pulse pressure. Okay, the mean arterial pressure is a single number that represents the pressure for blood flow. And so the mean arterial pressure is the diastolic pressure plus 1/3 the systolic minus the diastolic, or 1/3 partial pressure. Okay, so I should put myself on the frame here. All right. All right. The other way I like to think about what pulse pressure or what mean arterial pressure is systolic pressure plus 2 times the diastolic pressure all divided by 3. Okay, I can derive this equation from that equation if I wanted to. Okay, so but this is the way I like to think about it, because I think, okay, your heart is contracted 1/3 of the time, it's relaxed 2/3 of the time. So systolic pressure plus double the time in diastolic pressure, all of it divided by 3. And that is your average pressure, right? Your average mean arterial pressure. Okay. All right. So, okay. So either formula works. You do have to know it. Okay, it will be on the test. Okay. 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 The next thing you have to know, flow. Okay. Flow is directly proportional to change in pressure over the resistance. Okay. So the greater the change in pressure, the greater the flow. The more resistance, the less the flow. Right. So, I mean, if you think about it, makes reasonable sense, right? If I squeeze harder, I increase the difference in pressure, and therefore the greater the flow. If I put more things that slow it down, resistance, if I put more valves, if I put a lot more capillaries, then I increase resistance. Okay, so slower the flow. Okay. Okay. Just want to make sure I'm still recording. Screen. Okay. Okay. The factors that affect resistance the biggest one is the radius of the blood vessels. Okay, the length of the blood vessels and viscosity of the blood. Okay. Okay, the primary determinant of velocity, the total cross-sectional area of the blood vessels, so the radius of the blood vessels. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is the pressure reservoir. When the ventricle contracts, okay, the arteries expand to absorb some of the pressure, so it doesn't explode, right? So it absorbs some of the pressure and pushes it through slowly. So what happens is the pressure is less. Okay, so think about what happens when your arteries clog and harden. That increases the pressure on the system. All right, so systolic pressure, this is pulse pressure, the difference between the high and low of the arteries, right? Pulse pressure, okay? Mean arterial pressure is the average of, like if I took all these values and average them all out, then that would be the mean arterial pressure, okay? Okay, so this is manual monometry, or otherwise known as how to use an EP cuff. Okay, this will look, you guys will go over in the lab, so I will skip that. Okay, but make sure you know how to do that. Okay, so the next equation that you have to understand. Okay, mean arterial pressure is equal to the cardiac output times the resistance of the arterioles. Okay. Okay. So blood flow into the aorta is equal to the cardiac output of the left ventricle, right? That should make sense. Everything that comes out of the heart goes into the aorta. That's the only place where it can go. Okay. Okay. So if flow into the aorta exceeds the flow out of the aorta, then the blood volume increases and the MAP increases, and the reverse is also true. Okay. Changes in blood volume affect blood pressure. The blood volume is relatively constant through the day, but not absolutely. There's some gain and loss. Like, if I drink a lot of water, my blood volume will go up significantly for a little while. And then what will happen is the systems will kick in and reduce blood volume by making me pee more. Okay. Here's the thing. Okay. I can always drink more water to increase blood pressure. Okay. I cannot increase blood pressure without drinking water. Okay. So like blood volume decrease, the only way through replacing volume is through drinking some way, either drinking or IV, right? My body can lose water easily. My body can't gain water easily without active intervention of some sort. Okay. Okay. So the mean arterial pressure is equal to the cardiac output times the total peripheral resistance. Okay. All right. So this is a picture that makes sense. So the total cardiac output is the amount that's shot out here. This is the mean arterial pressure. This is the resistance, right? If I think about if I crank these screws and screw this down a little bit more, then what will happen, right? Okay, or if I push this a little harder, what will happen, right? So if I increase resistance, I increase the mean arterial pressure. If I increase cardiac output, I increase the blood pressure. Okay. So here are 4 things, okay, that change mean arterial pressure, blood volume, okay. Cardiac output is determined by heart rate times stroke volume. You guys already learned that last chapter, okay. So resistance, so the other 2, resistance to the system to blood flow, is determined by our arterioles. The amount of fluid volume is determined by the diameter of veins. So these 2 things are controlled by the blood vessels. Okay. Okay. The compensation for increased blood volume. So if I'm making you drink a lot of water, okay, eventually that water will enter your from your stomach and your intestines, will get absorbed into your blood, and so you'll get an increase in blood volume. Increase in blood volume will lead to an increase in blood pressure because there's only so much volume in there. Okay. Okay. So that triggers 2 things. The fast response is the cardiovascular system. The kidney response will always be the slow response, and you'll see that in a couple of different chapters. Okay. The fast response is vasodilation, so more volume, less pressure. Okay. More volume in the hole, and less pressure. Okay. Vasodilation decreases blood pressure, decrease in cardiac output, less pumping, less pressure. Okay. The others is just the loss of fluid through peeing. Okay. All right. So the arterioles is where most of the blood volume is controlled. Okay. Well, where the most of blood pressure, not blood volume, blood pressure is controlled. Sorry. Okay. So I just want to make sure you understand the chemicals that are mediating vasoconstriction versus vasodilation. All right. So I don't want you to memorize everything on this list, but you think some of them are really important. So the ones that I circle are important. Okay. Okay. So norepinephrine, definitely important. Okay. Vasopressin, angiotensin 2. Okay. These are the most important vasoconstrictors. Okay. The vasodilators. Okay. Epinephrine, nitric oxide. Okay. Histamine. Okay. Yeah. So these guys. Okay. These 3. Okay. AMP is important too, but I already put that on your test earlier, so you don't have to know that. Okay. Okay. But you have to know what these 3 things or these 6 things do. Okay. Okay. Hyperemia is a localized mediated increase in blood flow. Okay. Hyperemia matches blood flow to increase metabolism. So if I start running, then I need more blood to match the oxygen demands in that area. Okay. Okay. So tissue metabolism goes up. It releases metabolic vasodilators to ECF. the arterioles dilate, then the decrease in the arterioles dilate, so the hole gets bigger. As the hole gets bigger, the resistance decreases. And so remember, resistance is primarily due to the size of the hole. The bigger the hole, the resistance decreases very quickly, and that increases blood flow. Okay. Okay. So the other thing, reactive hyperemia, is what happens when there's a clog or blockage of some sort, or like a partial blockage. Okay. And that's reactive hyperemia. So tissue, the blood that flows down due to occlusion, the blockage. And so what happens is the normal stuff that builds up in the tissue, that usually is flushed out in the tissue, build up. And so they accumulate in the ECF. Okay. But once you remove the occlusion, once you pump it through, as soon as you pump it through, the resistance creates an increased blood flow, and therefore the vasodilators wash away, the artery goes back to normal. Okay, so temporary increase in blood flow. Okay. All right. Okay, so the sympathetic branch controls most of the vascular smooth muscle. Okay, like when you're resting, it really doesn't matter too much where the blood goes. When you're running for your life, it very much does matter where the blood goes. Okay, so here's the sympathetic control. Okay, sympathetic innervation of most systemic arteries. Okay, arterioles. Okay, this is an exception. We'll talk about this, and we'll talk about why the Viagra something like that. So, okay. All right, so norepinephrine maintains a vascular tone. Okay, norepinephrine binds alpha receptors, which causes vasoconstriction. Okay, so when you're scared, you release norepinephrine. Norepinephrine causes vasoconstriction, so it constricts your arteries, okay, arterioles, which sends the blood, which increases blood pressure. Okay, now to most of the body, there's less blood going to it. Okay, now the adrenal medulla expresses epinephrine into the blood. Okay. Okay. The epinephrine binds the same alpha receptors, but much lower affinity, about 1/10 the affinity of norepinephrine. But that doesn't matter. But the more important thing is epinephrine binds the beta-2 receptors on the vascular smooth muscle, skeletal muscle arterioles, which then causes vasodilation. The beta receptors override the response from the alpha receptors, and therefore you get massive amounts of vasodilation only where you need it. Okay, so heart, more blood, more pumping. You need your heart to function. The heart itself needs blood. Okay, the skeletal muscles need blood because you're running for your life. Your liver needs blood because your liver is where your glycogen is stored, and your glycogen is releasing glucose into your bloodstream as we speak, and therefore it also needs blood to flush out the sugar the rest of your body needs. Okay. All right. Okay. So the this one causes much more vasodilation and actually controls the other two. Okay, the constriction of okay. All right. There you go. Okay. So peripheral resistance flow. All right. All right. I'm gonna stop my lecture right here. And we'll pick it up on the next part. Okay. All right. Stop sharing.